So the libtards have ruined Christmas in a lot of different ways, and we know this to be true. But I would argue that the most effective liberal psyop when it comes to the art of ruining Christmas has not really been this whole happy holidays versus Merry Christmas thing. No, actually, I think the most effective way in which liberals have truly ruined Christmas in this country has to do with this. I'm going to illustrate it to you. I'm not going to kind of tell you straight up. I'm going to instead illustrate it to you by asking you this question. When I say the words Christmas or Merry Christmas as an American, what are the very first things that really come to your mind? Like in terms of imagery that you see in your head, when I say the words Christmas, what are the first things you see? Let me take a guess. You probably see things like, I don't know, Christmas trees, reindeer, Santa Claus holding a Coca-Cola bottle, Christmas lights, presents wrapped in a bow, things like this. But I'm going to take a wild guess and, presume that the very first sort of image you see in your mind when I say the words Merry Christmas is not the nativity scene, okay? It is not the birth of Jesus Christ. Like, we just know this to be true. And don't try to pretend like it's any different. I mean, let me just say that right now. Don't try to pretend. I know someone's going to come along and say, actually, Vince, that is the first thing I saw in my head. It's like, you're lying. I mean, so I'm sorry. It's true. You're lying. No, you're not. No, it's not the first thing you saw. And I'm not trying to shame you for it. I'm the same way. The rest of us are the same way. And it is a product of decades of godless, atheist, cultural propaganda that has got us to this point where, as you know, Christmas has basically become an entirely secular holiday. This ought to be very concerning, not just to Christians, obviously. I understand why it's concerning to Christians, but also, I think conservatives in general, because as we so often talk about on this channel, there really is no return in this country without the return of the faith that made it all possible. I mean, there's just not. Mainstream conservatives so often will talk about, taking back America, restoring traditional American values, this and that. But I mean, we ought to agree, I hope we can all agree on this, even if you're not a Christian, that there just simply is no return of traditional conservative America without the faith, without like the very basic and strong moral foundation that made that all possible. And that is Christianity, right? And so it really ought to be very concerning. Look, in the culture in general, since the 1960s, there really has been a concerted effort to remove God from basically everything. School, art, imagery, whatever. But it really ought to be super concerning to you at this point, really now, that a holiday like Christmas, right? I understand other things are other things. Christmas is a specifically Christian holiday. Christmas is a holiday that is specifically supposed to celebrate Christ. And liberals have been essentially so effective when it comes to the kind of cultural rewriting of everything that, as you know, Christmas now is about, Santa and materialism and whatever, but it's not about Christ. Like the Christ, America has forgotten the Christ in Christmas. It's simply so true. And it's even true of something like Easter, which I would argue is even worse because, as we know, Easter is basically the most important day in human history that there is to us as Christians, right? We're talking about the resurrection of the Savior of the world. And, it's been redefined by liberals to be something about like Easter eggs, like painted colorful eggs in like bunny costumes. Seriously, they're mocking you at this point. I mean, they are just straight up mocking you at this point. But let me ask this question. How do we as Christians and, as conservatives too, reclaim the Christ in Christmas, right? And I would argue that is something culturally that is very important in order. It's really like that first step into really bringing God back in America, right? Really making this a Christ-like, godly society again. It really, before you can just evangelize the masses necessarily, I think a good way to start is kind of culturally, in the Overton window, bring the influence of Christianity back the way it used to be, the way it was really before the 60s and onward. It started to be eroded and erased, right? That starts with like making things like Christmas and Easter in the culture, right? In terms of what people see, that imagery I brought up earlier, really bringing that back to what it's supposed to be, right? And what it's really about. So with that being said, how do we do that? Because as we know, we don't have the cultural institutions. We do not have control of mass media, of Hollywood, of the corporate advertisements, any of the stuff that kind of really trickles down and breeds the modern image of Christmas into Americans. We don't have the power to just retake everything immediately and start all the ads you see on TV show like crosses and nativity scenes and all that stuff. We don't have the power, as we know, to immediately make that possible. But I would argue, I know as cheesy as this sounds, it really does start with you. Okay, it really does start with all of us on a personal level. And the reason I bring that up is because I think even Christians, and even like honest Christians, I'm not just talking about people who go to church once a year or whatever, even like like serious Christians, quite frankly, often fall into the trap of still basically making Christmas about all the secular traditions and whatnot, And you might say, well, Vince, when I wake up in the morning on Christmas, I definitely say a prayer. I definitely thank the Father for sending his son into the world and all that stuff, right? And like, yeah, you have to do that. That stuff is all good. But I think the real question for us ought to be, as us personally as Christians, and if you're not a Christian, become a Christian, seriously. But, if for us as Christians, what's the ratio here? Right? What's the ratio? Because, there's nothing inherently wrong with gift giving or decorating your house, decorating your Christmas tree. There's nothing wrong with really a lot of these, modern Christmas American traditions. But I would argue, like, what's the ratio? What is the amount of time and resources you spend on the aspects of Christmas that are important, right? Honoring God, honoring Jesus Christ. And what are the kind of aspects of how much time, how much resources are spent on the materialist aspect of it, on all of the kind of modern American traditions? Because let me ask you this question. Okay, on Christmas Day, look, I'm not doubting you. I'm sure you say a prayer in the morning, you say grace before your meal, but like, how much of your time that day is spent really actively thinking and doing things that are acknowledging the truth about Christmas and acknowledging what Christmas is really about, and how much of your day is spent, gift giving, doing other things, you know what I mean? Just things that are like I said, the secular aspects of Christmas. Like, what's the ratio here? How much of your day is spent reading Luke, praying, whatever it is, right? And how much of your day is basically spent, just doing the gift giving, doing all that type of stuff. I'm going to take a guess, and I'm not shaming you. I'm not trying to shame anyone, because I think we all fall into this trap, but I'm going to take a guess that in terms of the ratio, I think most Christians, even in America, spend a lot more time on those secular aspects of Christmas than, praying, reading Luke, things like this. You know what I'm saying? And when it comes to your Christmas decorations, as a Christian, how much of your house and how much of the outside of your house is decorated with, the kind of American Christmassy things, Christmas trees, ornaments of that, and how much of it is, decorated with things like crosses and nativity scenes and things like that? Like, again, what's the ratio here? Again, there's nothing wrong with a Christmas tree, right? There's nothing wrong with the Christmas lights, but like, really, what's the ratio there? Like, what is the ratio? How many of your Christmas decorations in your house are about Christ and meant to be honoring Christ or whatever, and how many of them, like I said, are just like reindeer, Santa Claus, things like this? Again, I'm going to take a wild guess. For most of you, the answer is there's way more of them that are kind of these secular things or whatever. For those of you who are parents, how much of your time around Christmas is spent teaching your kids about reindeer or watching Rudolph or teaching them about Santa Claus or whatever, and how much of it is, teaching the story of the birth of Jesus Christ? Like, I would argue, even for most Christians, the answer is the ratio there just really is not all that good. And so that's what I would say. I would argue that in order to basically reclaim Christmas for Christ in American culture, it has to start with us. It has to start with us as the Christians. And quite frankly, I think it is true, we're all guilty. Like, I'm not trying to stand on some moral high ground. And honestly, most of my family is secular, so I probably, I don't really. Now, when I have kids, when I have a wife, we're going to try as hard as possible to really make Christmas about Christ. But I'm not even necessarily in such a position where, I can like lecture from any moral high ground. But seriously, serious question. Like I said, what is that ratio? You know what I mean? And look, the thing I think we need to understand is it's not necessarily just about us. Obviously, we ought to be using as much of Christmas as possible to, celebrate the true meaning of Christmas. But I think it's also important in terms of the Overton window, in terms of the culture, right? Because, when you drive around neighborhoods where there's a bunch of Christmas decorations up, it's like, you see, like I said, all these secular Christmas decorations, all the reindeer, you have those lit up reindeer, all that type of stuff. But very rarely, and I know I grew up in California, so maybe it's different elsewhere, but very rarely do I see those kind of lights and Christmassy things set up, for Christ, right? And I'm coming home, I really thought to myself, I'm like, it would be a lot, because I'm like, yeah, there are a lot of Christians here, like, you know what I mean? Like, I know some of you are Christian, and yet the kind of decorations you have in your yard are all secular. It's all Santa Claus stuff, right? There's no nativity scene, which honestly, I think just showing crosses basically out in your neighborhood and things like that, it is kind of frivolous, obviously, your faith, the amount of your faith doesn't change by, the strength of your faith doesn't change by the decorations you put in your yard. But really, if you want to talk about culturally making Christmas Christian again, the power of the Overton window and just things people see matters. So imagine if we collectively, as all of us who are professing Christians, actually decorated the front yards of our house, and when we have our Christmas party, people come in and they actually see, they see Christ, right? They see decorations honoring Christ, and they see that kind of little subtle reminder that, like, this is a Christian household and this is a Christian holiday, right? And decorations that are kind of showing that and demonstrating that. I would argue, that is sort of a grassroots thing that in the grand scheme of things can go a very long way. It can go a very long way, because the things people see impact the way they think. And, in the culture, it's just like you see things, you see trends, and people kind of start to go along with them, start to acknowledge them. And I would argue that is one thing that we as Christians have the power to kind of improve in this country and improve in terms of Christmas. We can't just take over mass media overnight, but even the mere, aspect of seeing a cross or seeing a depiction of the birth of Jesus in your yard instead of, just reindeer or whatever, I would argue, culturally speaking, that is very powerful. That is something that can do a lot. So, anyways, that's just what I wanted to say, and, it's a long fight. It's a long uphill battle. But, with that being said, I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas, Make sure to actually honor Christ on Christmas, as we are reminded. It is one of the most white-pilling days we have, isn't it not? Just imagine the idea. The idea that man was so wicked and God sent his only begotten son into the world to, save us from our sins. It ought to be very white-filling. So, if you're not Christian, honestly, tomorrow, just please, in honor of us, read a gospel, okay? Read one of the gospels or something, okay? In honor of us, in honor of this community. I know we have a lot of secular viewers. Genuinely, come on, do it for us. Do it for the culture, okay? Even if you're not convinced right now, do it for the culture, all right? Be a real conservative. As we know, Christmas is about Christ, so just do it. Do us a favor. Do us a solid. No, seriously. But anyways, guys, have a Merry Christmas. God bless you. Alpha moves only, and peace.
Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo as long